Okay, so hello everyone and welcome to the official proper house tour thing. For anyone who feels as though they might be lacking a little bit of context, there should be a little annotation in the top left corner linking to a previous video I've done which offers a little more history and backstory into the purchase of this home. But the long and short of it is that my partner and I have packed up our lives in the suburbs and have moved out here to the country to make a go of, well, living here, I suppose. Now the place does need a little bit of work, and to that end the intention of this video is to just offer a quick tour of the property itself, sort of showing the stuff that is good and doesn't really need to be touched, but also highlighting all the stuff that we are hoping to get to over the course of living here. So yeah, I guess kind of just hang tight and I'll show you around. So first up is the kitchen slash living slash dining space, which I suppose you could call open plan. It's all one big stuck together space, and really for the most part this is in pretty good condition. We don't really have to do anything to it at all. The kitchen seems to have had a relatively recent facelift and the appliances are quite good, in particular the oven, which is quite top notch. It's also just quite spacious. I often comment on how big the kitchen is, much to the chagrin of my partner. And it's got that big old island bench top as well, which just gives a lot of surface area to be working with. The general condition in here is also just pretty good. The plaster seems to be in fairly good condition and painted fairly recently. We'll probably repaint it ourselves, though that is purely a cosmetic preference and not covering up any damage or anything of that nature. There's hardwood floors all through this space as well, which have been restored fairly well, so by and large this entire space doesn't really need any immediate attention. And now we're going this way. Okay, so just behind you here, we've got the main entrance to the house, which adjoins this little hallway. And adjoining said hallway are the bedrooms and bathrooms. So over here, we've got the master. Over here's the second bedroom. And here's the bathroom. Though maybe don't go in there for a minute. So fortunately these spaces are all in relatively good nick as well. I'm currently occupying the second slash spare bedroom and using it as a makeshift sort of music studio for the time being. And while the bathroom doesn't really need any sort of immediate attention, we'll probably get to it at some point. While it functions just fine for now, it could probably use a bit of an upgrade in terms of the ventilation system, and it could probably also be doing with some additional non-porous surfaces, aka tiles. It's mostly plaster and wood in there at the moment, and it works just fine so long as we don't let it get too foggy slash steamy in there from showers, etc. But the long-term condition of that space might not hold up so well if we leave it as is, so maybe in the longer term we'll be looking to address that. Okay, cool, let's head up to the front. Alright, so we're up here at the front of the house right now. Over your right shoulder is a door that leads to the front of the property. And you may be able to tell that the most extensive work has occurred here so far. I guess in terms of chronicling this journey, we kind of jumped the gun here a little bit with getting all this plaster redone and all this sort of stuff, but it was certainly the most pressing work that we had on our plate, so we just got to it as promptly as possible, really. So I guess for context, we're standing in what you'd call the study or a sunroom or conservatory. We've got a nice big set of windows here which lets a lot of natural light in. So yeah, it's quite a nice little space. And over my shoulder here, this is the wall to the laundry over here, which you access through that way. So in the grand scheme of things, you haven't missed too much, but essentially we've had to replaster this entire space. As this is quite an old property, we did have to get it inspected for asbestos. And unfortunately in this front portion of the home there were positive samples found. Now asbestos I know is very nasty, but there's nothing particular to freak out about here because it was all what's called non-friable. Non-friable? I don't know how to say it. None of it is particulate asbestos, it was all solid cement sheet. So with a qualified professional, it was all easily removed, and now this space is as safe as any other in the house. But of course, in getting all of that removed, we then had to replaster the space. It's worth noting that the asbestos was only really in this back portion of the room, and this front part, the sunroom slash study, was asbestos free. However, and maybe I can show you this, give me a sec. Yeah, I've got some. However, we did discover that this room had no internal plastering whatsoever and instead was covered in this stuff. Now this stuff is basically just some kind of particle board, some kind of wood composite, incredibly thin, non-insulating, and speaking of insulation, there was no insulation at all in the wall cavities here. So while our initial intent was only to replaster in the spaces where the asbestos was removed, our plasterer discovered that in fact none of this space was plastered as well. So of course, while he was here and on the job, he replastered this entire space, added insulation and all that sort of stuff. So this room is in a much better state right now, but there is still a lot of work that needs to be done, not least of which of course we need to sand and repaint all the walls in here. And as you can probably see, the laundry itself is the least finished room in the entire house. None of the floorboards in there have been sanded or refinished, so do not match the rest of the house. The enamel steel sink thingy in there, I will probably attempt to restore, at least for now, and maybe we'll eventually replace it. And all the architraves need to be redone in here as well, so we've got plenty to be getting on with. While we're still in here, I just wanted to touch on the windows briefly as well, because again, this house is old, and to that end, the windows are old as well. Basically, over the course of the years, they have shifted and twisted, and they aren't seated so well in their cavities. Where there are actually fly screens present, they don't do a very good job of screening out flies and other various insects. And of course, there's just been general degradation over the course of time. So at the very least, we'll be looking to refurbish them, but it's more likely that we'll end up tearing the majority of them out and replacing them, which I understand is very expensive, so we probably won't do it all at once. For the most part, it's the front of the house that gets the majority of the sun, and so it's the front-facing windows which seem to have taken the brunt of the damage. So we'll be attending to those first and then seeing how the rest go from there. Okay, cool. Sorry, we're going outside now. So this is probably just going to be a bit of a laundry list of all the stuff that we're planning to do on the exterior of the property in no particular order and in no particular priority. Or maybe kind of, we've got certain priorities. But yeah, I'll just show you all the stuff that we are, well, trying to get to. I guess while we're down here, I'll mention that the decking is not in the greatest of shape. It definitely needs a little bit of love, so we'll be sanding and refinishing that at some stage. Maybe even replacing some of the decking, depending on how it goes in the long term. Why yes, this does look like an empty patch of grass, but in fact, this is where I'm hoping we'll eventually place an outbuilding. As I mentioned, I'm currently using the spare bedroom as my makeshift music studio / editing space, but in the long term, I'm hoping I'll have a separate building altogether for me to set up a proper, definitive, very nice, sound-treated, fun, good times space of nice. Ideally, it's going to be quite a massive space, probably split in two, because I'm hoping to have a wood shop / storage area as well. And then further up the side over there, we will probably need some kind of car storage facility sometime soon. So either, namely, a garage or a carport to fulfill that need. So as you might be able to tell here, we have been testing paint samples because we are planning on painting the exterior of the house as well. Not that the paint's currently in particularly bad nick, but I think it's just had several subpar paint jobs done over the course of time where it wasn't sanded back, and rather it's just been coat over coat over coat, and so the collection of paint looks pretty crap. Another thing that we started work on prior to the recording of this video has been the removal of this absolute mess, which was a gigantic blackberry thicket. This stuff. In this region, blackberry is essentially an invasive species, and as far as we were able to tell, this was several years, if not maybe a decade, of overgrowth. It completely consumed the front fence and was taking over several of the trees up the front here. It was an absolute mess. So we've invested dozens and dozens of hours in trying to get it removed, and we're finally nearly there. And then hopefully from there we can put up a nice front fence that isn't gross, prickly, evil stuff. I'll be happy if I never see blackberry again in my entire life.
This is Bruno. He is not our cat, but a frequent visitor from 2 doors down. And while I wouldn't consider this an immediate need for fix, he is a pest, but an adorable one.
So, the roof. It's actually in pretty good condition, all things considered. Made out of
Colorbond, I think it's called. Yeah, Colorbond, this metal tin stuff. It's pretty good. The only real thing to mention here is that we may repaint it depending on the color that we end up repainting the house, because if they don't match, if they clash a little bit, it shouldn't be too much of a hassle to get this repainted. So the guttering may need some attention as well. While I have done my best to clean it out, particularly the long sides of the house, the gutters are very hard to access, so we'll likely have to get a professional out to help with that. And I'm not sure you can really see from there, but the guttering itself may need some added protection against all the greenery around here as well. We have several gorgeous but very large trees which drop a lot of foliage onto the roof, and that can clog up the gutters, so some kind of protection to try and stop some of that from getting into the drainage and blocking it up would be nice, especially because we get quite a bit of rain up here, so yeah. It likely goes without saying, though, it is worth noting we're planning on doing just general landscaping and gardening on the property as well. We'll be looking to get a few garden beds set up and some veggie patches so that we can add an element of self-sustainability. Speaking of which, we'll certainly also be looking to add things like solar panels, water collection, and that kind of thing to try and bring our running costs down and do our bit for the environment. So, I think that just about covers everything, or at least everything I can think to mention anyway. Before wrapping this up, it is most certainly worth noting that while I have a little bit of DIY experience and take an interest in woodworking, I am by no means a professional or experienced in any way when it comes to doing renovations and that kind of thing. So the idea here is to be a lot less instructional and I guess a lot more explorative in terms of ideas and solutions and all that kind of thing, and just taking this journey together and seeing where we end up. And so from here, I hope to have you along for some, if not most or all of the work that we have planned around here. And I hope that it's just going to be a really fun and enjoyable learning experience that we can share together. With all of that being said, any questions, comments, or queries are all welcome down below in the comments section. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't as yet so you can come along for the ride, and I hope to see you again soon.